The purpose of Wealth Talk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. WealthBuilders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Welcome to episode 186 of Wealth Talk. My name is Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, joined today by our founder, Mr. Kevin Whelan. Hello, Kevin.
Hi, Chris. Good to be with you again. What a week it's been.
Well, indeed. And you weren't around with us last week, so Paul stepped in and did a grand job. And we were talking about pensions, but boy, has there been some news in last week's budget.
Oh, my goodness me. Has there been? Oh, I suppose you want me to tell you all about it and who's affected and all that.
Well, I'm sure everyone's heard, but we should probably recap with what those big pension changes were.
Yeah, they're massive changes, so definitely worth the recap. I'll talk about I think 4 key areas that people would need to think about. And then maybe identify, I like 7s. So why don't we identify 7 types of people that might be affected and what they might need to do, what they might need to consider to take advantage of this absolutely stupendous news that kind of came out of the blue a bit, really. We knew there was some tinkering. Governments like to tinker, don't they? We've seen them tinker before. We thought there'd be some changes in terms of what you could contribute. So there has been some changes in what you're allowed to contribute to build up your pension benefits. In other words, to get tax relief on. Yep. And that's the real key, right? So it's not about contributing, that's the key. It's the fact that if you make a contribution into a pension, which a pension is obviously designed as a future income vehicle, it's like building up a pot for you to, I suppose, tap into at a later date. And, if we get a chance, we can talk about why I think that's a really, really bad idea, because it's actually counterintuitive to the whole principle of wealth building, which is why would you need to build up a pot for later when you can access money today? But most people rely on pensions, so let's go with that. There's been a change in the contributions, and it affects in 2 different ways. One is the maximum contribution you can pay into a pension and get tax relief on was £40,000 a year as a maximum. And we've seen a 50% increase to 60 grand. Now that's pretty big. I mean, if you're able to, and of course not everybody is able to do that, you can build up a very sizable pot very quickly. And we'll talk about who might be interested in doing that in a moment.
And just to clarify on that, Kevin, that amount is payments from yourself, your employer, and any third party.
Yes. I need to caveat this, though, that the maximum contribution is 60,000, but there's an implied maximum depending on who pays. So if you pay, the maximum is your income or 60 grand, whichever is the lower. Now that gets really important as we think about business owners, because what the business owners often do, Chris, they often pay themselves small amounts of salary and take their money in other ways like dividends and so forth. So if you pay a contribution personally, and let's say you're earning 12,000 quid as a salary, but your big income coming from other sources, 12,000 is the maximum. Mm-hmm. However, if you pay for it through your business, it's 60. So there's a real big win on that one for business owners, and I'll come back to that. The other kind of tweaky thing going on there, which doesn't affect very many people, is something called the annual allowance, sometimes called the tapered annual allowance. In other words, it's restricted because the government thinks you earn too much. And so, that has changed a tweak. It's gone up to, from 240 to 260. But in addition, instead of it being the maximum you can pay in is 4,000 now 10,000. So it's kind of useful to know that, because some high rate taxpayers or additional rate taxpayers kind of switched off of pensions, and we've met some of those over the years.
Yeah.
So contributions are changing, and I think that's for the better, but it still puzzles me and perplexes me, putting aside allowances, that so few of our young people are joining in with their employer's scheme, yet with workplace pensions being pretty much universal now. In other words, the government saying, you have to pay, your company has to pay, people are opting out. You can opt out. And some of our younger people increasingly are opting out, preferring not to, because they don't want to buy into this deferred payment when I'm 60. I'd rather get access to my money now. And you can understand that thought, not least because is the state pension valuable anymore in terms of its date? It's increasingly getting pushed back and back and back as the holes in the economy reveal themselves, and the government, at some point, will move them further back. I think that's inevitable as we live longer. And of course, the big demographic issue from a macro perspective, the big picture perspective, is there are less people supporting the workers in the future. So historically, that's getting that dependency ratio, as we call it. There's now so few younger people who will be supporting through their tax bills us oldies. And the fact that most of us who are baby boomer generation have accumulated property wealth and other wealth, they probably don't need it, but the younger people to come are going to really struggle. So I think the demographic is going to change, but we're digressing. But nonetheless, it's an important subject because those of us who are parents are obviously concerned about where's the future of our own children going to come from to ensure that they are financially independent as they get older. And that's getting increasingly harder.
And a matter of education, isn't it? Because I guess, unless you really understand this when you're younger, you're shown the power of compounding. And of course, when you're young, you might think, oh, it's so far away, I don't need to worry about it now. But, some people just simply haven't been shown it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can get on to another debate about whether there's reality is there compounding in the stock market when nothing is really added. It's added and taken away in the ebbs and flows of the market. Compound interest, of course, we know through the often misquoted Albert Einstein, the eighth wonder of the world. It's okay if it's interest on top of interest that's locked in, on top of interest that's locked in, on top of interest. That compounds. But if you're riding a stock market wave and it's increasingly more volatile than it's ever been, then it's more difficult to compound. But certainly our younger people have got time on their side where the long-term track for investing in the stock market is always up. It's a bit like inflation, it's always on the up. And the best time to take advantage of it is when you're young. So getting free money is a good thing. I remember doing a favor for one of my business owner clients, and he was lamenting the lack of participation with the younger member of staff. And I said, well, I'll do something for you. And here's what I did, Chris. I got a 20 quid note out. Right? A room full of about, I don't know, 40, 50 younger people. 20 quid note out. I said, right, who will give me a tenner for this 20 quid? And they're kind of looking at each other going, what's this fool doing? What's he about? Has he lost his marbles? He's lost his hair, but has he lost his marbles as well? And it's like, eventually somebody, some whippersnapper just jumped up. I gave him my 20 quid. He gave me 10 quid. And they were all laughing and so on. And the guy who did it was feeling smug. And I said, well, that's just free money, right? I'm giving you a huge return on your money. Well, that's what your company's offering you. You pay in your 3%, they'll pay in their percent. So they're matching your money, and that money's free. So why wouldn't you take advantage of it? Now, I didn't get a chance to find out whether that materially impacted on it, but I think it's really important to encourage our younger people to know that there is free money there. And it's always good when these lessons come from the parents, if they know it. And that's, I suppose, just hints again, Chris, at the good work we're doing in the background to prepare for the WealthBuilders for Families program. But anyway, so number one, then contributions. Number two is there's been a massive change in something called a lifetime allowance. Now, you'd think that a government would want people to contribute as much as possible, to have a biggest pot as possible. But historical governments have intervened with that and saying, well, we think a certain amount of money is enough on which to give you tax relief on, because you get tax relief on the way in. In other words, if you pay in personally, you get personal income tax back. And if you pay in from a company, you get your corporation tax back. Now, that's really quite important because corporation tax rates are going up. Anyway, the lifetime allowance, which was at the time we went into the budget just a shade over £1 million, and we could debate whether £1 million is what £1 million used to be. You think about what can £1 million buy you today as an income. Most annuity rates would be, say, 4%. If you're drawing money out, as often people now know this concept of drawdown, brought in 2015, when you can simply, if you like, tap into the value of your pot and draw money out every month or every quarter or every whatever, periodically, then most advisors advocate a drawdown rate about 4%. So if you think about that, well, what you're going to get for £1 million, 40 grand a year? By the time you pay the tax on that, yes, somewhere in the twos a month. It's not really going to make anybody fabulously wealthy. Certainly good, but and most people don't get anywhere near the million. But anyway, which is part of the issue I'll raise with my fourth point. But the lifetime allowance, shock horror, not horror actually, but shock surprise, abolished. Which means so many things I've written, so many things I've recorded, I'm going to have to change all that. Because we've always talked about the lifetime allowance in our SSAS program and the lifetime allowance in our IFA division and so on. And that's gone. So it means all the problems of being tested for lifetime allowance and tax charges of 55% for money you had in the pot over £1 million. I have to just make a point here, Chris, that some people think the lifetime allowance is an allowance on contributions. It's not. It's not you can only pay in £1 million. It's the value of the fund. And it was tested at whenever you drew money out, and it's automatically tested at 75. But that test won't apply anymore. They've sneakily kept one thing back, cheeky things. And that, I think that was an afterthought. I can imagine myself being a fly on the wall in a room somewhere in Whitehall, and they said, well, what do we think about this lifetime allowance? Let's abolish it, right? So you can build as much money in you want in your pension. It doesn't have to be £1 million, it could be 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. You can build your pot up as big as you want. And they go, yeah, that's great. That's going to be eye-catching. That's going to be great for Tory voters because they're all going to be in favour of that. And then somebody's come up at last minute, I think, and said, but if somebody builds a pot of 4 million and takes their 25% tax-free, that's going to be £1 million tax-free. We won't get tax on. Oh, no, we better change that then. Let's make it 25% of the current lifetime allowance, which is about 268 grand, give or take. Mm-hmm. So that's what they've done. They sort of stuck that on as a Post-it note to say, well, you can have as much money as you want, but we're not going to let you take out more than 268 grand tax-free. I don't know. It's a bit bizarre, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
So the rest of the money you have is taxed at your normal income rate. So it's a bit like having a giant ATM. You got a few million quid in your ATM, you go in, take money out, you pay tax on it. No national insurance, just tax. But the tax-free cash bit is limited to the 268. The third issue is something called the money purchase annual allowance. It's complicated language, I know, with these things, Chris. But there are some people, because we've got to think about pensions affect everybody, young people building up their pot, but also there are a significant number of people who are already drawing money from their pension. And this money purchase annual allowance said, if you were drawing money out of your pension, not the tax-free cash piece, but the income, you actually went in and you tapped and drew income, then to avoid you just taking the money out, putting it back in, getting the tax relief, taking the money out, putting it back in, get tax relief, and recycling, as they called it, they put a ceiling of £4,000 you could pay in. Well, that's now in line with the papered allowance, the kind of higher rate people, it's now 10 grand.
Yeah.
So again, those people who are drawing money out and don't need all of that money, they can put up to 10,000 a year in.
Yeah.
So quite valuable and useful things to be aware of, because so many people in retirement are kind of switched off, and they can build their money up again.
Yeah, and that might be particularly useful for people who were forced to dip into it during the pandemic or with costs rising.
Very, very good point. And I think a lot of people did and got caught out because they didn't know the rules. And all of a sudden, whoops, I can't top it back up again, even though it was a temporary thing. They didn't realize that it triggered that weird restriction. Well, while I'm excited by all of these things, Chris, there's definitely been some rabbits set off a running here. Political rabbits going off in all different directions. Apparently, my wife says I'm the only one in favour of it that she knows. It's okay. I don't know why that would be, but I'm in favour of it because I think you shouldn't be restricted to how much pension you build up. That should be up to each individual. It's like, why would somebody tell me how much property I can buy? Anyway. The point there is, I think there are dangers that this could be undone. I think there are already objections to it, and I think they'll run and run. I don't think Jeremy Hunt is for changing those. But of course, we know that not too long now, was it a couple of years away, there'll be an election, and if Labour get in, they'll withdraw it. So it's difficult to plan. So in a way, in a bizarre way, I'm happier if things are stable, that you can plan and plan well, than if they're completely reversed. And it's rare for financial legislation to be retrospective. They completely undo something. But there's a danger this could happen. So I think some people will, put their 60 grand in and do what they can. And others will be hesitant because they'll be fearing, well, if I build it up significantly over the lifetime allowance, I could get caught by some kind of political volte-face, a turnaround, a U-turn, and find that they're now affected again. So it's a worrying time for many people. So both exciting and worrying all at the same time, which is unnerving in some ways.
Yeah, and I guess we would welcome any questions that people have inside of our Facebook community, which is free to join if you're listening now and you're looking for a safe space with like-minded people where you can have a conversation about this. And head to wealthbuilders.co.uk/Facebook. You can join the group there, and we can answer any questions that might be posed.
Yeah, and we run a SSAS mastermind, for those who know what a SSAS is. That's sort of much more flexible pension for business owners. We do a mastermind every last Thursday in the month. And I think one or two this year, particularly as a result of this, Chris, we might open up to non-members to give them an opportunity to see what we do and ask those questions, because I'm sure there are people who are perplexed by this, not knowing whether to jump for joy or just sit and glumly think. I don't know. I'm kind of one of those, although I'll always be planning the maximum, and SSAS can solve part of this problem anyway, as I'll cover when I talk about families. So touch on who's affected. I mean, we've already hinted at one or two. One of those is, there are many people, Chris, and this was a particularly targeted group, which is the NHS doctors. There's a big concern that for many doctors, really there was no reason for them to stay employed, because each year you get an increase in your pension that could potentially be punitively taxed. There's a complex calculation, and I won't go into it here, but there's a formula that says, the amount of money you've got at the beginning of the year from the amount you've got at the end of the year in benefits. And for many, longer standing doctors, it was just didn't make sense for them to stay employed, because it was actually costing them money to be in work from a punitive pension point of view. So I think that's gone, and I think that will help retain some doctors so they won't be taxed on the benefit, because there will be no lifetime allowance on that increase in benefit. So I think that will play out well, and I hope it plays out well for the long term. So we retain good doctors who would like to remain helping the NHS. It's surely easier to keep the good, older, well-established, experienced doctors than to consciously and deliberately have to find younger ones that take 7 years to go through their education, with all the student debt that goes with that, which is another subject. But I think that's an interesting group, and I think it'll be really fascinating in the coming months to see how the NHS doctors respond to that. And there'll be others affected by that, military and others, because as we know, the only final salary or defined benefit pensions now are pretty much the domain of the public sector and the banks and financial institutions. I wonder why that is. Anyway, we'll talk about that. So that's one group. The high earners we touched on, the significant high earners. Then that change for the taper relief will be useful because so many of them did switch off. But there is one point about the kind of, let's say, the well-paid, but not say the top 1%, but certainly in the top 5%, those who are earning more than 100,000. So I often ask people, what do you think the highest rate of income tax is in the UK? And people go, well, it's 19%, or it's 40%, or it's 45%, and they forget that there's this terrible little quagmire between 100 and 125 grand a year, that anybody who earns in that level, they're losing their personal allowance on a 2-for-1. So for each £2 they earn, they're losing their allowance. And the marginal rate of tax on that between 100 and 125 is 60%. Mm. So if you're paying a whacking 60% on your money, but now you can make a healthier contribution into your pension scheme, you can bring your income below that 100 or to 100, and you can wipe out that 60% tax thing. So there'll be some people doing some maths to work that one out. And I would say if you're in that area, get in touch, because we can help you do that calculation to see whether or not you can avoid that 60% punitive tax.
Yeah.
That's a biggie.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's 60 grand, not 40 grand. I think there's a big point there. The other group that I think probably, would be well advised to consider what's going on now is business owners, people who are running business owners making profit. And there are a few reasons for that. The first one is I meet a lot of business owners who have got significant retained profits, meaning the money is just sitting in a business bank account, often not earning any money, but the owners don't want to take it out because they want to pay the tax on it. And I understand it, but it's another option to think about here. And when you couple that with corporation tax rates are going up, and when those rates go up to 25p in the pound, there's another reason to be thinking about making pension contributions. Because any contribution, as I mentioned earlier on, is not linked to what you earn, it's linked to the fact that you're a business owner. So you can pay in the full 60,000. The other benefit is you're getting that tax relief for 25p in the pound, not 19p in the pound. It's quite chunky tax relief, really. And if you're building that up, and then if you understand how a SSAS works, which gives you access to the money, which you can then relend to your business, or you can invest in other assets, then you're not pushing the benefits to when you're 60 or 65. The business can benefit today, and your own personal wealth can be growing today, which is why we're big advocates and fans and somewhat evangelistic, I suppose, on the subject of at least understanding how SSAS works, because it brings so many more things into play. What I kind of quite like is the richness of the control over what investments you make. And for those who are, doesn't matter what your preference is to build your assets, whether it's the stock market, whether it's gold, whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's trading options, whether it's property, whether it's even shares in your own company, it doesn't matter what your interest is, you can pursue that. And if you're getting 25p in the pound back, you're getting a discount on the price of all those things by 25%. Rather than have your money sitting in a bank account with no relief, put it into the pension. You can stick it in, let's say it's gold just for the purpose of it. Would you like to get a 25% discount on the price of gold? I don't know. Maybe. So if you can get a discount and you can still lend the money back to your company if you need to scale it or support it in some way, I think there's a big benefit for business owners. And I'm hoping that we can share that. And especially given that there are more benefits in terms of the maximum you can pay in beyond the 60,000. We won't get into that today, but there are options to pay up to $500,000 in a single year. Then some businesses can make a serious dent in tax relief and at the same time build a massive tax-free trust fund for themselves, their businesses and their families. So I think that one will be high on our to-do list to share that knowledge and information. What do you think of that one?
I like it. And it reminds me of the conversation with Paul last week where we were just talking about when people really get this, it's that circular personal economy of just, put the money in the pension, claim the tax relief, then borrow it back, use it, and just keep circling round.
It's a very virtuous circle rather than the traditional pension of delegating the money to a third party, then forgetting all about it until you get to your retirement. And then you kind of look back and go, what the hell happened there? Mm-hmm. So it's not just about tax relief. It's about the ability to get involved. It's that return on intellect that we often speak about in our ROIs, that you get smarter as you get involved. And anybody who's building wealth is in the wealth management business. So you have to be involved. If you don't, you get what you deserve, really, which is a delegated, abdicated pot of money. And if you let a property do that, it would dilapidate in the end because nobody's maintaining it. And there's so little work that's being done to help individuals maximize their income from the pension. Most of the institutions and the advisors are focused on just what's the value. But in the end, you've got to convert that value into income. So having more assets that you can own with cash flow is a much better way to build your wealth, whether it's inside or outside of a pension. So I don't deviate my thinking from that.
Seems like a great moment for me to head on to Trustpilot, actually, because we've had a review just come in from Jason. Right. And Jason says, I reached a point in my life that there was a real burning desire to get to a position financially where I was not looking over my shoulder anymore. There was a real awareness that financial independence was within reach, but only if I engaged with the right people and undertook the right education. WealthBuilders was recommended to be by my business coach, and I organised a chat with Kevin Whelan, and we talked, and he gave me excellent proactive advice and discussed the idea of me joining the WealthBuilders Academy and community. This I have done, and I'm now undertaking the 9 steps, and I'm very excited about what the future holds. My early impressions are incredibly positive, and the overall support and the genuine advice you literally cannot put a price on. The future is definitely bright, and the legacy I want to create for my family is within reach. And he says, thank you.
Wow. It never ceases to amaze me that people will put their own words and so elegantly stated. I know it's early days for Jason. And in fact, we're very much hoping to collaborate with Jason at some point. And he's dropped us a note to that effect. So we'll have a conversation with him in the coming weeks and months to see where he's at and how, we can help even further. But that's great. So, thanks to Jason for that. Now, if that's come from a business coach, he's a business owner and perfectly in that kind of model that I just mentioned there, and the third group of people who are affected, which is business owners. The fourth group, Chris, very popular group, and in terms of accessing pensions these days, is the property business owner. Not the same as a trading business owner where there might be manufacturing or they're providing a service or whatever. This is an organization, a company that is using property as a way to build wealth. So the asset is property, and they're either making capital gains from the sale of units they convert and sell, or they're making rental gains from the ownership of real property that puts money into their life. And what's great about the lifetime allowance changes is it means that uniquely, again, back to SSAS, bigger projects can be done because people can pool their money together. Families can pool their money together. Property business owners can pool their money together. And there's no issue on the lifetime allowance. And with the contribution levels going up, this whole idea of doing bigger, stronger, better, more profitable deals looms much larger, with pensions playing an important role. Because you just talked about the circle, didn't you? That personal circle of your money going around to you. Well, you can use money to buy property, to own property, to refurbish property, to develop property. And all the ways you can add value, the pension can be the source of the funds. And if it can do that, then you're being your own bank. You're not having to go to a third party to then send them interest, where that interest leaves your life and goes to pay the wealth of another organization. You're creating that virtuous circle of being able to do that for yourself. And I think maybe we might see successful property business owners, as they all pay corporation tax. They don't pay capital gains tax, it's corporation tax. So with that corporation tax going up again to that 25p, we might actually start seeing property business owners recycling those profits and building the pension pot to then borrow more money. So it's a very, very elegant and clever way to be able to recycle your own pension money, get your tax back on your own profits, and use that money to buy and acquire more property. So I think that's going to be a big one for the remainder of 23 and 24.
Excellent points.
Yeah.
And everything we're talking about here is summarized within our free membership, which is easily accessed by heading to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership. And we give a summary of SSAS pensions in there. We give a summary of all of our key IP, because we're talking about the pension pillar today, which is just one of 7 pillars of wealth that we focus on. And there's already so much within that one pillar that we've discussed today that, if you can open your eyes to some of those others, and within our free resource area, we've got information around all of those as well. Yeah.
And I suppose if you were listening to this thinking, well, for the most part, when people have pensions, they tend to be stuck on the stock market roller coaster, and you can pay more money in, that's fine, but it's still fundamentally a more difficult asset to get cash flow from. Whereas the pensions can increasingly be pointed and redirected towards cash flowing assets like property, like business, like intellectual property, and joint ventures and collaborations together with other people, plugging and playing money together, and everybody getting tax relief and everybody winning, which I think is a great and powerful thing of having a community of people like-minded, all sharing best practices and lessons and inspirations. I think that's really part of what we envisioned when we created WealthBuilders and created a community-led organization rather than you doing it on your own. So I think there's another valuable point there. Touching on some other groups, I suppose, Chris, the older groups. So many people, as I mentioned, you've got 3 stages to a pension, haven't you, really? You've got the building up, the taking out, and the passing on. Right. So the building up we've done, you can put more money in, the lifetime allowance is bigger. The drawing out, so many people are drawing. The flexibility, what was called pensions freedoms, a bit of a misnomer, because you can only be free if you've got control and certainty. And for most people, they don't have the knowledge to be able to deal with all the complexity of having to now almost have a nest egg and then cracking eggs to live. And we're seeing more people running out of eggs, Chris. They're running out of money before they run out of their own life. And that's a very worrying place. So we're encouraging that thought about creating cash flowing assets, not just spending the eggs. Have a golden goose, don't have the eggs, is the whole idea there. Anyway, some older people who are drawing the money. We talked about that. So when you're drawing the money or you're considering it, now you don't have this limitation of the £4,000. It's a £10,000 allowance. So it does allow you the option to take money out and then build it back up again, take money out and build it back up again. So I'm pleased to see that, because, as I said, so many people got caught by that particular rule not realizing, and I think you mentioned that, Chris, in the pandemic and with the current economic crisis, people naturally turn to a source of their pension as a way to get some income out, and why not? So I think there's a benefit there for older people not to feel like they caught a cold without realizing. So that's that group of older people. And there are other people who perhaps, Chris, who have benefited over the years and have already committed significant sums into pensions where they're affected by the lifetime allowance. They're already exceeding or very close to the lifetime allowance. Then, of course, some of those, and bizarrely, Chris, I've met people who over the lifetime allowance, and I said to them, "Okay, that's great. Lifetime allowance is just a tax limit, really. How much you can get that's tax free without the tax benefits being lost, at least fully lost, anyway." And they're switching off the returns on their pot. I mean, almost deliberately restricting the growth because they didn't want to pay a tax bill. And it's kind of a weird thought for me. And I'm controversial and I'm challenging, and that's my style in nature. But I would say to that, well, okay, let's have an imaginary conversation, Chris. You wrote a book called "Escape the Rat Race" at your boss, right? Let's pretend you're in a job, and let's put you in the position of you've got a job and you're on 100 grand a year, right? Nice, decent job. You're putting in your pound of flesh. You're getting your 50 quid an hour, equivalent of for your 2,000 hours a year. And your boss knocks on the door, and I'll pretend, just for the sake of today, being the boss, go, "Chris, can I have a word? You've been doing a good job. I would like to give you 200 grand to do exactly the same job as you're doing now. Would you take the job, Chris?"
I'll take that.
You take the job, right? But then say, "But by the way, Chris, you're going to pay more tax than you did before. You realise that, don't you?" And
Yeah.
"Oh, no, I won't take the job then. I'd rather pay less tax." So to me, the focus is always build as much as you can, diversify as much as you can, build cash flow as much as you can, and don't worry about allowances, because you can always, with pensions, particularly if you use SSAS, redirect them to other assets in your life. So in a way, you can grow your pension, but take the money out of it and put it somewhere else in your life. So there's benefit to understanding how a SSAS can actually help mitigate lifetime allowance should it ever come back. Because I think there'll be those who are affected who'll be jumping for joy day one, but they're not knowing whether this is going to come back. So I think definitely getting tuned in to what a SSAS can do anyway, because then you can deflect some of that return down other members of your family line. And this is the last group, I think, which is families, those who want to leave a great legacy. It's a fantastic opportunity to see that really significant sums of money can be passed on. And the interesting thing about all pensions is they're trust funds, and there's no inheritance tax to pay. So if you die leaving a pension, not a final salary pension, right, that's another story. But if you die leaving money in a pot, money purchase pensions, or sometimes called DC, or as the opposite of DB, defined benefit, defined contribution. The terms are interchangeable, but it's money in a pot. You know that because the pot's going up, the pot's going down, the pot's going around. But that pot can be passed on completely free of inheritance tax as long as you nominate a beneficiary, because the trust has to nominate a beneficiary. And it's really important to check whether you've nominated a beneficiary for your pension, because so many people just haven't done it. It's a bit like they've got a life insurance policy but didn't put it in trust. And then it gets caught if they die because it then forms part of probate. You definitely do not want that to happen with your pension. So getting your nominated beneficiary form in, sometimes called an expression of wish, which is, if I die, I want this money to go to. That's essentially all it is, same as a life insurance trust use. If I die, I want this money to go to. And by creating that, it doesn't go through the will. It just goes almost directly to the people that you want it to go to. And there's real value in that. And I think as families become more involved in pensions together. And again, a nod to SSAS, because it allows family members up to 11 people to join forces together. You can have family members joining from age 18, which means it's much more than a tool of stewardship and passing on knowledge and even involving the young, not necessarily at 18, but every kid's different, every young person is different. But you can get them to participate even virtually. If I gave you £50,000 to invest, what would you do? Go research that, come back and let's discuss that. And you can do that virtually. So let's pretend you did. What would be the return a year later? So there's a way to involve children in pensions, and maybe that wakens up the idea that they should join a scheme of their own as soon as they can. And that kind of drives us full circle to me, all this is about just driving awareness, Chris, that pensions are a great source of tax relief and a great source of being tax-free. But wealth is not about that. Wealth is about building education, building stewardship, building assets at cash flow. And if you can do all of those things and use the maximum, like using your maximum ISA, which didn't change, by the way. All this changed massively, but ISAs didn't change, still 20 grand. Still 9 grand for junior ISAs if you want to put money into your kids' names, they pick it up at 18. So some very, very weird things, I think, going on in this budget. And let's see what happens to the political outpouring for the changes here and see what actually happens. Hope we don't have a kamikaze budget where something happens one day and the next day it's all about face and back to where we were before. But interesting for a podcast, Chris. And I think I might just hold back on re-recording everything I've ever done about pensions.
Interesting indeed. You've made the topic of pensions interesting, Kevin. Pearls of wisdom. I'll have to get you on the BBC, I think.
I don't think they want old geezers like me with the light shining on his head, right?
Oh, that was great. Really enjoyed that. Thank you for sharing. And just enlightening us a little bit more about some of the areas that weren't covered perhaps just in the news, but what does this actually mean and who does it affect?
Yeah. And don't forget, if you've got any questions, we're here to help. So, we're a caring, sharing organization. And if it's worrying you, just get in touch in the usual way. So, Chris, we'll
enjoyed it
next time. Yeah. And
thanks to the listeners, as always. And I guess, Kevin, we'll be back same time, same place next week.
We will indeed. Until then, my friend, see ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the WealthBuilders membership site to help you create, build, and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.